Great. Good morning, everybody, and happy Veterans Day. I'm so excited about this panel. I have worked on series, but not all that many. And as this business changes weekly, hourly, there's so much to learn all the time about the best way to develop a series, how to pitch a series. So this is as exciting to me as I'm sure it is to you. I had the great luck in, I guess it was 2004, 2005, of being part of the Sundance Channel team who worked to bring The Staircase to the United States. A film, it was a series by Jean-Xavier de Lestrade and Denis Poncet, and it really, it was the first time we did a limited series, really for Sundance Channel, and it really put the channel on the map and changed, I think, the sort of the face of what we see in documentary today. And then at Al Jazeera America, which was a short-lived but great job I had in the doc unit. We did a lot of series, but some were formatted, some were, more limited series, story-driven, character-driven. So, but it's the biggest question I think for all of us is like, what should be a series? What should be a one-off? And we're going to get into all of that and much, much more. But let's first meet the panel. We'll start with Mira. Tell us who you are. Tell us your journey to film, and talk to us about what you do.
Sure. My name's Mira Chang. Hello. Oh, yeah. My name's Mira Chang. I am a producer, director, and I used to be a cinematographer. I still do sometimes, but haven't done for a while. I've done everything from feature docs to formatted documentary series to limited series, so this panel was quite exciting for me. And if you haven't seen The Staircase, that was pretty much...
It's on Netflix now.
Yeah,
and it never seems to end.
Yeah.
Groundbreaking in many ways, including crime, including limited series. But so I'm interested in this panel. Right now, I'm at a company called Show of Force, which is an Emmy and Peabody winning documentary filmmaking company. And for about 5 years or 6 years or longer, I was VP of development and production, which means I had several projects going at once. And I was developing all sorts of unscripted projects, from digital to series, to one-offs, to everything. So this question in terms of what makes a feature doc or what makes a series comes up like every day, pretty much. So that's pretty much it for me. Right now I'm doing a lot of consulting, producing, and I'm just finishing a feature-length film for PBS that had started as a limited series that then had interest as an episodic ongoing series, and then just went back to a feature length. So we had several different decks out in the world.
That's great. Do you have a clip of that, or is that?
No, a different clip. So there's another project that I brought to show today, particularly because the premiere is happening on this coming Wednesday night at 6:30 here at this theater, and it's called Tightrope: Americans Reaching for Hope, and it's a project that Show of Force partnered with the New York Times journalist Nicholas Kristof. We've done several projects with him and his wife Cheryl Wudunn, including a project called Half the Sky, which was kind of a mammoth international project about girls and women, and then a follow-up series, a 3-part series that looked at women and girls in the US. And then this project, which also, it's part of the conversation because in terms of the content matter, we went back and forth several times about whether this was a 4-part series or whether this was a feature doc. I always thought it would be a feature doc, so we went out on that, and I think it works better, so maybe it's something to talk about after we watch the clip.
Oh, great. And we'll talk about the other project, too, for sure.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So this is going to be a trailer for Tightrope.
Great. And when is this? Is it going to be on PBS, or?
We're not sure yet, actually.
Yeah.
We just finished the film, and we're doing the festival circuit, and we're not sure yet about the distributor.
Great. And is it for 1 hour or how?
So this is a feature-length doc.
Feature length.
Yeah.
Oh, so it ended up being a feature length.
Exactly.
Ah,
Exactly.
okay, great.
Yeah.
Got it. It looks fantastic. And when is it screening here again? So make sure people come and see
I know, because I was like, I need to tell everyone. So it's this Wednesday night at 6:30 at this theater here. There's another showing, I think, on Thursday during the day, but that might have, I think that might have sold out. It's a smaller theater, so
Great.
yeah,
Thank you, Mira.
absolutely.
Libby, tell us
Hi,
about
everybody.
yourself.
Some real honest lighting here. So,
Yeah, I know. It's
first, a quick shout out to the ladies. We like the ladies panel. Who knew? We're such experts on series, the ladies.
the women.
I am Libby Geist. I started my career in documentary at a really small documentary production company called Shoot the Moon Productions down in Tribeca. I was the second employee there, and I always say that was my film school. You know, I was Googling cameras and sort of made up an insurance plan for us, and made it up as we went, and produced about 5 films there, and then produced a 4-hour 2-part series for ESPN, where I got to know some of the executives at ESPN, and that was 11 years ago that I jumped from really small production company to the network side. And that was as they were developing and just coming up with the idea of 30 for 30, which is the series that I've been a part of since I started at ESPN about 11 years ago. We are having our 10th anniversary right now from the first film being released. I think I've had a hand in various capacities on now 140 sports documentaries, which makes me want to go take a nap. But obviously, in that time, even in our little sports documentary world, things have changed so drastically. We started off then with doing only 50-minute films, which for us was 1 hour of TV time. And that had 3 commercial breaks, and it was very formatted. And now, fast forward to today, we are almost at every length, every shape and size of documentary, which for us is such a wonderful challenge. Now we can have conversations with people like you and producers out in the world, and they say, I have this story, instead of, here's how we're going to cut it up, and here's how we put it into your box. It's a 20-minute podcast. It's a 5 or 10-minute short. We had a 7.5-hour film a few years ago.
OJ Made in America.
Yes, everybody feels one way or the other about that. Films of any length and size. And then I'm now overseeing all of our original content on ESPN Plus, which is our streaming service that launched last year. Got a bunch of shows ongoing and limited series there, which we're kind of figuring out too. But I think I'm in such a privileged position to meet with so many filmmakers out there. And again, I think, they come with a very strict, here's what I want this to be, right? Maybe it's a limited series, maybe it's a film. And we can just be like, hang on. And whether we say it in the room or not, we're just like, if we love this, we're like, okay, what should this be? And that, again, is such a privileged spot, right? Maybe it's really hard to pull off if there's no footage or archive. Okay, well, maybe this is a really cool podcast. Is this a one-off or a series? Maybe this is a short. And we just have so many levers that we can pull now that, again, as you said, you create 3 decks for one story. For us, we're like, just tell us what it is and let's figure that out together.
Yeah.
And, it's a really exciting time for storytelling, I think, for that very reason. So we're really excited to be part of it. And again, to be out of our little boxes now and to be able to, shape things as they go. We have a little clip here that we showed, I think around Christmas time last year, so sorry if it's a little late, but it represents some of the longer form stuff we do and one-off documentaries that we've done. If you don't mind running the ESPN clip, that'd be great. Thank you.
It's going to sound ridiculous, but you kind of forget that you're watching a sports show or sports documentary or ESPN because the deep human dive into the stories is so wonderful. So congratulations.
Yeah, thanks. I again, after doing so many of them, I appreciate you saying that. Just selfishly, I'm like, I'm done with sports docs. We're like, can we just tell, like, I'm seeing just all this other work that's changing the world, And so, but it's really cool to have the vehicle and the audience And okay, even with like as you mentioned the OJ project, it's like okay, this you think you're going to watch something about this Heisman winner and a football story, but we're going to give you 3 hours of the history of LA and so many more cultural layers that for us is hugely important in greenlighting a project. So glad to hear you.
You want to ask her.
They
And
did,
by the
yeah.
way,
Yeah, people saw it, which was
that
nice.
happened.
Leah,
Hi.
hi.
How are you?
Tell us about you and what you're doing around Divided.
Yeah, so my name is Leah Natasha Thomas. I'm an independent creative producer, which means I spend a lot of time working with filmmakers tackling this very question: what do we have and who is it correct for? And I think in that process we figure out whether it's a feature, whether it's a series. I'm very fascinated at this point about other verticals, music-wise. What do you do with extra footage, and how do things live in short form online and digitally in that kind of space? I started at a studio, so I come to documentary. I actually fell into it a little bit. In a way, I come to film from a narrative side, and so for me, the process of filmmaking, it's still in the back of my head. What does this look like as a movie, right? Just always naturally, what is the narrative here? And then how do we try to both cinematically and authentically bring these two stories to life, and how do we establish that sense of trust? Because I think, as people know, or may not, I think a film is built 3 different times. It's built on paper, and then it's built in the field, and then it's completely rebuilt in the edit. And so being able to kind of always keep in mind for myself, what is the theater going experience? And when I say that, I don't mean necessarily big black box and graduated seating. I mean, what is the moment of suspension of disbelief where your audience sits down, whatever that mode or form is, whether it's their living room, whether it's with friends, whether it's on their computer, or whether it's in a space like this. How are we engaging, and how are we maintaining that layer of both trust and also entertainment, but also how are we moving the needle forward? And so most of the work I do centers in race, in gender, race, class, and a lot of criminal justice reform. And so for me, battling those lines is an incredibly important space that I try to hold on to. I don't have a clip. I was a bad girl. I didn't do my homework. But I think what I would, for this kind of conversation, I think the beginning stages and the kernels, which is really about paper and your imagination, is where I think this, the impetus of form comes into place, and then figuring out who is the right partner distribution-wise for that. So that's more how I'm looking at my part of the conversation.
Tell us about America Divided.
Oh, you mean the show that I should be showing? So America Divided was a 4-part series that I did with Becky Teitel here that looked at inequality in America. And we had 8 different storylines. Criminal justice reform was one, a segment that I sat over heavy that was centered in Chicago. And we had 8 different celebrity hosts. And so for Chicago, our host was Common. For education, it was Jesse Williams. For domestic workers, it was Amy Poehler. Opioid crisis was Zach Galifianakis. Oh, sorry, Peter Sarsgaard in Ohio. Voting rights was Zach Galifianakis in North Carolina. Norman Lear was here with affordable housing. And there's always someone that I'm forgetting. Rosario Dawson. This is why we have to always be together. And it was a wonderful way for us to, not only look at what was going on in America, which brought deep insight for me, particularly in Ohio, because that story conflated not only just what the opioid crisis was, but the decline of manufacturing jobs, unions, and then also the election that was coming up, and the deep-seated disappointment with TPP and the government about that, which really opened my eyes to where we were as a country. But all of people ask us, and as you're pulling together a series, and sometimes there's a heavy lift, right? When you want to have people, be repeat customers and come back and tune in. There's been a lot of conversation around our use of celebrity hosts who were not necessarily quote unquote journalists. And I think in series now, and in doc, we're in an interesting space where the the eye that brings you in and the perspective that brings you in is equally as challenged as the material that you get. And for us, all of our celebrity correspondents had personal connections to the storylines we assigned them to. And so Peter Sarsgaard, for example, his family was, deeply battling the opioid and the heroin crisis within the context of his immediate family. Same, obviously, not obviously, same with Common, same with all of our other celebrity hosts. So I think as we talk about, packaging and what it takes to have that lift and to go into some of these rooms and talk about what you want to do, the elements that you're putting together, I think, is a space for deep interrogation, both ahead of time, so you can answer those questions, and then also just like throughout the process.
Yeah, that's great. And Half the Sky also had celebrity. I was at ITVS when we were helping to fund that.
Exactly. And many similar questions that Leah was just talking about in terms of we were tackling this enormous issue, which we kind of often do. But it's like, okay, global refugee crisis. But we were tackling the issue of the oppression of women and girls worldwide and opportunity. And so part of the real discussion about how this was going to be produced and how the stories were going to be told was also about, like, how are we going to get people to watch this? Because some of these topics are really, really difficult, maternal mortality or FGM or stuff that you might turn on the TV and maybe you're not ready for that. But, being able to, we made the decision to bring on celebrities, like when we're looking at poverty in West Virginia, we brought Jennifer Garner, who knows that area really well, and her family's from there. So there could be also a personal connection, but also understanding that who's going to watch this, and how do we engage people beyond just the project itself, and how do we keep people coming back, because that was a 4-part series as well. So
Teaching from preaching to the choir and getting to a bigger audience, which is so important.
Exactly. Which is what we, so 2 of the projects with Nicholas Kristof and Charlotte Moudon were based around books that they were writing. So when we went to the Tightrope trailer, I was talking about, like, some of those questions came up because we wanted to talk about poverty, we wanted to talk about homelessness, but this project in particular, A, didn't feel like it served to have celebrities involved. B, it had a much different storyline narrative, which was on a personal level, where Nicholas became a character more than he was, a facilitator or a journalist. So those were I find them super interesting questions that went on for quite a while in terms of, during the research phase and during the storytelling kind of ideation.
Yeah. Where can we see America Divided now? Is it on any of the...
Yeah, it's on Epix, and then we had it, I think it was on Hulu for a minute.
It's on Hulu and Amazon as well.
There we are.
Season 1 and season 2.
Okay, great. So, go
Check
out
it
and
out.
see it. It's amazing.
Thank you.
And last but not least, Becky.
Hi, I'm Becky. I'm with Time Studios. My backstory is a little bit different from everyone's and sort of weird. I started in live events, actually, doing the Tony Awards, Emmy Awards, NFL kickoff show, and then I moved from there. I wanted to get into material that was saving the world and felt like it had some sort of larger societal impact. So I moved into news, and I worked in news for a number of years, and then decided, 4 hours on healthcare or 4 hours on this incredible story, 4 minutes, is nowhere near enough time to tell this story. So I got really antsy with news and said I need to do long form. And I moved into documentaries, one-off specials. I did that for a number of years, and then said, oh, an hour is great, but 4 hours would be even better. And went from documentaries and one-offs. I left actually to develop America Divided. And then since then, I sort of have been like off to the races on series. So I've done series for a number of years, and I'm now at Time Studios, which is Time Magazine's film and television arm. And we can show in a moment, I have a trailer here for what we're doing. But we've actually been out here for a pretty long time. We did Amazing Grace, the Aretha Franklin documentary. We did A Year in Space, which is streaming on Netflix right now, working with NASA and Mark Kelly. and we have a film that was sold out yesterday that premiered here called Paradise Without People. It's a really beautiful film by Francesca Triani. If you haven't seen it, if you didn't go yesterday, there are upcoming screenings, and it's about 2 Syrian refugees following their stories. They both gave birth to babies while in a Greek refugee camp, and then we followed them over the course of a year as they tried to get asylum. We're doing a big Martin Luther King project with the estate that's in VR, which is really incredible, recreating the March on Washington, and we have a number of series in development that are on the Times Studios side that will be announced in the next few months with some big streamers that I can't talk about yet. But we are sort of always asking the same questions I think everyone up here has been saying, if there are a lot of great stories, and just trying to figure out what is the right format for that. And we at Times Studios do all of it. We do live events, we do features, we do series. We can show our trailer.
Yeah.
I think it's called Times Studios.
I really didn't know you did that much. It's so amazing, and so happy that that you're here. So that's fantastic. I just to jump into a question for all of you, and let's keep this very conversational, and then we will open for questions pretty soon. But what, all of these different kinds of formats, lengths, you even brought up podcasting. Everything is just. I mean, there's just so much hunger for good material, and in all kinds of formats, lengths, where you see it. Do people come to you first with an idea? Do you, what constitutes what you think is a limited series? What constitutes what you think is better as a one-off, a short?
It's a great question, yeah, and I think we were all joking around about this yesterday. The first question we always ask if someone, or that I always ask, and I know Mira was saying as well, if someone presents a series, is why is this a series? And I think there's obviously a huge appetite for series out there now, and I think a lot of people have this instinct of, that's a really sexy idea, and I want to pitch 4 parts or 6 parts. And I think the most important thing to do is sit down and figure out whether or not the material sustains that. I think there are some projects where, for example, I did a 4-part series for Sundance Channel about the Jonestown Massacre.
Oh, yeah.
And that felt like a show that actually needed to be a 4-part series. And I'm always a little bit iffy taking crime series. I know it's stuff that sells, but to me, what it felt like we brought to that was we had extra time not just to focus on the massacre. So we had 2.5 hours to really dig in and explain who are these people, like what brought them to Jim Jones, how did they end up in Guyana, how did he evolve, like how did he become this person who people did that for. So I think projects like that, or OJ Made in America, another example, which I didn't think that I needed that many hours of O.J. Simpson, and I watched it and I was like, oh my god, I needed every single one of those minutes, and no other project had done that. So I think there are projects like that it really does support, but I think if it doesn't, you sort of end up diluting the story, because one of the hard things about developing a series is you have to have as many different versions of that story as episodes.
Yeah.
So you need to be moving the story forward in every single episode. You need to be ending with a cliffhanger and something that's driving the story forward that people want to come back and see. And I think that that's something that people sometimes lose sight of when they're developing a project. And you really box yourself into a corner in the edit room.
Because you really need to not only sustain the story for how many episodes, but sustain your audience and their interest.
And have the material to sustain it.
Material.
Sometimes people say, oh, this would be a great story for a limited series, but then like, what do you have? Do you have the assets? Do you have the archival? Do you have just the footage? Are you going to shoot more footage? Will this really sustain a 4-part or 5-part or 6-part?
Yeah. 10 parts.
Yeah, I think for me, I start with the filmmaker first and I say, well, what is it that you want to say? And if what you want to say can be said in a sentence, then we should really be focusing on a feature. If you want to say more things, then we have to dig in a little bit more, obviously, and then we go into, well, do you have the assets to sustain thematically all the things that you want to come across. The other thing I ask right after that is, is it a long movie in your mind, or is it a TV series? Because I think when we say limited series in several different contexts, people think different things. And so the cliffhanger part comes in different moments, where if we're doing something that is really a 7-hour movie, then we're looking at chapters, and the chapter build is a little bit different. And then, just holistically, I also ask, are there enough people in this world that you really want to live with? Real talk. Because we've got to do that. And when you're talking about creating something that then has to, live in such a large, expansive way, we have to really understand how deeply we're going to be embedded and how many people's lives as a result, to make sure that that content is actually there and actionable and interesting and engaging, and all of the other aspects that go into that. So I like to start there, because oftentimes I find a director, and I direct as well, so I'm not saying it from a kind of attacking point of view. I find oftentimes people will start with, here's a really good story, or here's a really good person that I met. And that's great. But at the end of the day, I think that cinema, I think, is meant to transcend. It's meant to take people into other different spaces and times so that they can build on levels of empathy, and I think particularly in doc. And I think what you want to say and how you want to be either disruptive or encouraging in that space is I think the kernel of where things start, and then from there we can figure out whether or not you really need that much time to say it.
I think you brought up a really important issue too, is that, like documentary, the word series has so many connotations, so many definitions, and you have to really figure out what this is that is this a continual, like a story that continues episode after episode, or does one episode contain a single story within it, and approach it in that way. Yeah.
And those are really hard, an anthology series where there's sort of an umbrella for the series, and each episode is its own story. Those are really, really hard to sell, because the question that you ask for all series, the first of why is this a series, and the second, why do people care? What's going to keep them coming back for each episode?
What's going to unify the whole thing?
Yeah, and I think that's a really difficult question, even if it's a series where it's one strand all the way through. But if it's an anthology series, that's even more difficult. And I think where you see that work really well is if you're talking about music or sports or sort of big events that live in themselves, or sexy enough that people are like, okay, well, I want to come back and see, Two Escobars, or I want to come back and I want to hear about Kanye West, Jesus Walks in Songs That Shook America. But it's a very, very hard sell to networks, because there's just too much content out there.
Yeah.
And it's expensive.
Yeah.
It is expensive.
And sports are too. Well, I was just going to say that I think series is like the hot thing right now. And I just think, as you just said, Becky, like, it's really hard to do well. And I think for us, after the success we had a few years ago with OJ, which we'll stop referencing in a minute, but for us it was like a real moment where all of a sudden everyone was looking at us. They were like, "What? You must want to do 100 more of these, and just replicate this over and over again." I was like, "This was really fucking hard." Like, sorry, Doc NYC, but I was like,
how long did it take to make OJ?
So I think from the first meeting we had to sort of through the festival and awards run, it was about 3.5 years.
When
3
Ezra
years.
first came in with the idea, did you think he was crazy, or like?
So we went to Ezra with the idea, actually. Yeah. So Ezra Edelman directed that, and he's just a genius and a wonderful, wonderful director. And his producer, Caroline Waterlow, is like insane. If anyone has a job, please call her. We met with Ezra and pitched it to him. I remember the coffee shop. I was like 100 months pregnant and like waddling around, and he was just like, "What are we doing here, and why?" And we had tried to find another project with him. We had done a film with him, and I said, "What about OJ?" And he kind of rolled his eyes, as I think a lot of us probably did when you first heard about it, right? Like, okay, this will be kind of a gross murder mystery, the chase. We all sort of, I think we know that. But when I said to him, like, well, what if we gave you more time? What if it wasn't 50 minutes or 100 minutes, right? Like, what if you went, do your research, and you tell us what the story is, right? And I think that sort of sparked something in him, like, okay, maybe this isn't just a chase or a Heisman, football film. And he blew it off. He was not interested. And he randomly was also on his way to LA. He went to LA the next day and met with some friends who live out there. And he says, in a very Ezra way, like, started reading every book, and I think his friends that knew LA and some of the backstory and some of the cultural layers to OJ's story, Ezra started thinking about it. And so we actually commissioned, I'd have to go back and look, but it was like up to 200 minutes, which we all were like, oh my God, who would watch that? Maybe. And then I remember watching the rough cut, and Caroline, his producer, was like, we're a little fat, we're a little long, and she's like, wear comfortable clothes. I was like, oh my God, like, what does this mean, So we came with our notebooks ready to give notes, and we walked out 7 hours later, and I was like, there's a few things I want added here. And I remember my boss and I looking at each other like, okay, like, this feels like a thing, you never totally know, but we're like, this is a thing. So we went to our bosses and said, luckily we'd been doing 30 for 30 for so long. We were like, we need you to trust us. We need a little more money. We need a little more time. We think we have something here. And because of those years of trust, and, he was like, okay, like, I trust you. Tell me what this is. And so months later, we had a cut that we were ready to show people, and it just kind of took off from there. So, that was just a natural progression. And again, I think when everybody said, go do that again, we're like, well, there's not that many humans generally, much less sports figures, who span pop culture in some way for really 50, 60 years, right? In so many different ways. He was a movie star, and he was in the commercials, and then he was the football star, and then the murders and the trial happened. And so, like, he just in the meatiness of his story is so unusual.
Yeah, so
and
it's Shakespearean and
and the ups and downs and how we got there, and then the racial divisiveness of the every step of the way, and it was just really, there was so much to it, and it was about so many things. And so when we stopped after we knew that film was working, we really sat down many times and just thought, who else has this kind of a story? And it was less of who can fill 6 hours or 7 hours, and I think that's a mistake. People go in like, this has to be a series, whether the story means it or not. I mean, I feel like, whether it's, again, podcast or TV series or streaming series, like, I know when someone's commissioned a 6-part series and they didn't need it. Like, I'm watching and I'm like, ooh, you like bit off more than you could chew here. You know what I mean? And I'm a little bored by episode 4, and I'm really bored by 5, and I'm kind of like, am I going to stick with this thing? So I just think really being true to the story and allowing yourself to realize, like, not trying to fit it into a certain number of episodes or a certain box, but what should this be? And then know that there are outlets for all of those things, and just be true to the story. It's just so much to ask of people, even when we have rough cuts, like, internally. Hey, I really want you to watch. We have a 3 or 4 hour project we're working on now, and I can't get my coworkers to sit down and watch it. And I'm like, I really need your advice. I really need your eyeballs here. And it's like, it's just a big chunk of time. And, it's like, oh my God. So you got to keep that in mind too. It's got to be really, really great to ask people, especially in this day and age with so much content in the world, like, trust me, this is worth it, And if you don't have that element to it, like, why do it? I just think, I don't know. I just feel like if people aren't going to sit with it and really love it, I don't know why you do it anymore.
I think it's as a film. He thinks of it as a film. It's a single film, which I think is really, and it feels that way. I mean, it just, yeah.
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, it's one of those things where it's not just the story of OJ. So we know the story of OJ. We've seen things before, or Jonestown Massacre, right? So what is the added depth, or what is that a lens into that can serve, a multi-part series? Because, like, I've never seen OJ presented that way, and that was really the story of America at that time. Also. Right. So that's why, like, absolutely, I was tuning in for the rest of the episodes. So I think that's something to think about, because there have been stories that have been told before, but is there a way that you can tell it differently? With all those elements still, it's still hitting all those elements. Like, do you have the material to support it? Do you have the storylines in depth that can take you chapter 1 has a narrative arc, the entire series has a narrative arc. So those kind of questions.
Yeah, I think on the other hand too, there are one-off docs that I wish were series because you leave with so many questions. I mean, an example, Roger Ross Williams' wonderful film about the Apollo. I'm like, I wanted so much more afterwards because he hits on a lot of great things. It's a wonderful film, but I could have sat many hours and just digging into all of that. So it kind of goes hand in hand.
I think you raised an interesting point, which is one thing that people can do, and especially if you're trying to develop the series and you haven't done the series before, you don't really have a big portfolio that people sort of trust to give you that opportunity, is to start with a limited feature and use that sort of as the backdoor pilot for a series. And I think that's something that can be really successful. And again, to the one positive, I know we're being a little negative on like all the hard work that goes into series. At the end of the day, I mean, story is universal, and access is access. Characters are characters. Good story is good story. And I think the way to approach series is the way to you approach any work that you're doing. Is this a story that needs to be told, and then go from there and let the material dictate the format.
Yeah. So we have we have producers, we have commissioning editors here. Do you, like with the OJ, like you went out and pitched this to Ezra, do you generally, is that the way you work, or do people also bring you ideas and pitch for all of you?
Yeah, ours is a mixed bag. I mean, again, we get so many pitches. And you guys know it's hard.
Like a seed of an idea when they come to you?
Yeah, so we fully fund and commission and own all of the projects we've done so far. There have been occasional, in progress projects that we've jumped on, but we haven't acquired a film, which I think is so weird, and we're trying to convince our bosses to do, but it's for another panel. But yeah, but I think we try not to just be reactive, because I know how hard pitching is, right? It's really hard to know. No one knows all the other projects that we have in production, and why, the puzzle that I'm dealing with, and what holes we need to fill, or so I think a lot of times, and so many of our pitches, just because it's ESPN, is like, my uncle is my coach and he is the greatest. I'm like, I know he is, and thank you for that, but yeah. Yes, occasionally the right filmmaker and the right story, comes along. I would yeah, sure. But we also are constantly reading and going to festivals and just meeting. I mean, I think my favorite part of the job is going to festivals and seeing a super weird feature film or a short or something that's like totally off the wall. I mean, like, I don't know if you even like sports, but here's my card, and if any time in the next 10 years something strikes your fancy, like, let's talk. And that's worked out for us before. So I think we have a great development team who keeps their, finger on the pulse of upcoming filmmakers and people who have a real point of view on different stories, and then just keep finding stories that we think are interesting, whether they're really high profile athletes who have the cultural layers, or is it a smaller story that's just holy cow, you cannot miss this thing.
Leah, Mira, you producers, do you go to people with ideas? Do they come to you? Is it back and, a combination?
It is a little bit of a combination for sure, and it's the number of projects, if you're on the production side and you're going out pitching, it's a huge slate of things that are constantly being, prioritized in different ways. But it is an incredible thing to understand, like on the buying side or commissioning side, what people are looking for, and to be able to develop those relationships. Like, we had a feature-length doc in development that was looking at deconstructing kind of America during the Vietnam era through the lens of music, but not like a playlist of Vietnam, but really deconstructing it. And we went into CNN, and we were like, I know you're looking for a series. It was original series. And then we mentioned it, and it's just about, they trusted us. We had a great relationship. And in the room, they were like, what about a series? Which is really tough, because when you're talking about music, and, some of you might understand, but music mixed with archival, mixed with, you know, oh my God. Whoa.
That's a budget, yeah.
Right, so, and that became a series for CNN Originals, which is one of my favorite series ever. So it's about having an open mind and realizing, okay, wait, this could be a really great idea. What are the challenges in order to execute it, you know, and could this sustain, you know, a series? And that one in particular is not like a limited series. It was an episodic where each episode is close-ended.
Yeah, I would say it is a little bit of a mixture of both. I was fortunate enough after my first film I worked on 3.5 Minutes, which is on HBO, about the murder of Jordan Davis, that ended up being shortlisted for an Oscar. And since that time, I've had more so of an incoming business, right, where people will seek you out, thinking that you do this thing and we want it to be here and how can we, whatever. I've learned to pick people over projects. And so the process for me is a little bit different. We date when I go for about 6 months. We just hang out, go to the movies, talk about things, hear all about your dog, just to really understand and build a relationship about how topics and thoughts and things kind of flow through your mind. And after that, we start to talk about the project that you have. And, you know, I will be honest, for me, I'm looking at, and I think this is something as filmmakers should be understood also about producers, just as you're building an arc for your career, I'm also building one for myself. And the body of work has to speak for both of us. And so sometimes, like right now, I'm on a doc on electronic arts, EA Sports, which no one would ever have thought that would be something I would ever do. But when I heard the story, the director used to work at SNL, and she had she's a very acerbic, funny sense of humor, and it was sort of like the Big Short and the rock and roll era of sports, you know, of gaming and whatever have you. For me, what became exciting was working on a topic that I hadn't worked on before. Nobody died. I wasn't trying to change a policy. I wasn't, you know, it wasn't that. And so for me, it was a nice breather to step back, and I also happen to really like her. So I think as we think about structure and form and platform, I think also we have to be thinking about persons and personalities, and that's a part of the assessing. And so it comes to me, long time.
Processes up and down.
Yeah, and yeah, and just on the last sentence of that, which means that I'm looking at not necessarily the film that you're working on right now. I'm looking at the next 4 films that you want to make. And so I've now got a little collective of people that I love, right? That live around my living room and on cards on my walls. But you know, you have to want to be able to grow with somebody. And so as the project comes in, it's also an assessment of what is a second and a third and that. And so that also creates a consistent flow of work and things to do.
We have to open up for questions.
So I just want to add, Leah and I are no longer dating. We're married. We've made it.
We're planning.
But just to add to Leah's point, it's a lot of, and I think whether it's on the commissioning side or co-production side or producer side, it is find your tribe and your filmmaker friends and build that family. So we are in a long committed relationship working on projects together.
It's true.
Time does a combination of all of the above. So as the director of development, I develop projects internally that come out of the Time newsroom. We're in sort of a really unique and wonderful position where we have literally an office full of brilliant, hardworking journalists who are just doing groundbreaking work every day. So half what I do is taking that great work, whether it's a video short, a multimedia piece, a print piece, and developing it into a series or a one-off. Half of it is taking outside pitches. We're about to do more than 100%. So the number's off, but we take outside pitches and then we do co-productions, or we have sort of filmmakers who we know and like, and sometimes it's, you know, they'll come to us. with a project and we get it under development together and then take it out, or sometimes we have projects and we go out to people and say, this feels like a good fit for you. But we do a little of everything.
Yeah, that's so great. It's great that you two work together, and it's a great fit.
Yeah, it's a very good fit.
Let's open up for questions. Yes, right here in the center.
Hi. It's obviously, thank you. This has been really informative, so thank you for being here. It's obviously challenging to create a series. Obviously more challenging than creating a feature in like a blanket way of putting it, just because you don't have to think about cliffhangers and like keeping the audience engaged as much like from one to the other. So what would you say are the advantages of developing a series, maybe from a marketing perspective, or like what would, obviously you talked about like having more time to develop, if you have a story that requires more time, you may have that in a series as well. So I was hoping you guys could talk about that. And then a second quick question for Leah. You mentioned chapters, and we usually talk about episodes when we're talking about series, and so I was wondering if there's a difference between the two, or just...
So that's Leah speak. So there's, that's not necessarily. But what I mean by it is, so the first series I ever did was called Murder in Black and White, and it was a look into unsolved civil rights murders that was on TV One, and then simultaneously we did a show that was on the History Channel about one specific murder, which was of Johnny May Chappelle. And that we had a host, and we were looking at one episode. Each episode was a different murder, right? So that for me is that for me is an episode. It has a very consistent form, and it requires other things like narration or host or whatever have you. I tend to look at those things differently than, let's say, I know we're not supposed to bring it up again, but OJ, which for me was more like chapters in a book, right? It's a continuous story, and the one before informs the one that you're reading next, but it's actually kind of seamless and it's going together. And that is also different from a cliffhanger series. There was a project that I was working on called 13th and Locust, which was about Mumia Abu-Jamal and the trial. And there was a murder mystery in there to be solved, but there was also all of this world of these people that came together to do what they did. And so in that, we had to build in specific devices of not only cliffhanger, but also how do you keep all this information consistent so that the person understands the breadth of what you're finding out in episode 2 for episode 5. So it's just my way of categorizing what kind of filmmaking we're doing or we're approaching, and what are the structures and the tools that we're going to have to use to employ in order to get that across.
Speak to, I know you may have a room full of filmmakers who've done feature docs that have taken 5-10 years and had 1 or 2 editors. What are some of the mechanical things we should be thinking about when now we're asked to deliver 10 episodes, maybe?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
Thinking about your team as you develop the project.
Well, I think the hardest lesson that we learned, that's a really good question, because it really is longer in every way, right? And the production process is longer. We're doing 10 hours on, somebody may have heard of Michael Jordan. No problem. No one cares about him. No pressure there. Yeah. And that we're working with this guy named Jason Hare, who's lovely. It's just an example of one of the projects we're working on now. And for him, it was really different because he was like, I'm not sitting in the edit crafting every second of this thing by myself, right? It's not me and an editor. I think he's got 4 edits going right now. And the delivery process to us is really unique, right? Like, all right, are we watching the whole thing at once? Is this one story, or is this more chaptered or episodic? What is our word? Liaison. So, how are we watching these, and how does that affect my notes on episodes 6, 7, and 8, right? And so I think his need to separate himself as just a filmmaker who, again, is in a really tight team and is super hands-on, like he as a director has had to let go of some of that and let his editors go run off and create something that of course he has shaped, but they have much more vision, I think, than he's used to. and then he can sort of pop in and out and not necessarily be present every day. I think that was a huge change and a big change for all the filmmakers that we work with. And just staffing that up, I think, is really hard. I think finding one editor that you love and trust and are courting is such a huge part. We all in this room know how important editors are. But to find 4 or 5 of those people that you are saying, here's my baby, go, raise it, is really tough. So, and that is, there's just how long do you need those 4 or 5 editors and what phase are they in? I think the process is very tricky and it's probably project to project, again, depending on if it's individual episodes or one story. But that goes, your archivist, do you need an archivist for the full time, or is that just like deep dive early on and then they come back for the licensing side of things? I think it's a lot more people and a lot more of a budget and a lot more to manage than I think people realize. And it's a really different mindset than maybe some of you who are doing individual films are used to, and I think it's hard. You've got to really learn a new skill and flex a new muscle and really trust your team, I think, probably more so. I don't know, you guys probably know that better than I.
And scheduling.
Scheduling.
Yeah.
Communication between the different episodes, like, wait a second. One editor wants to use this scene in episode 2, but actually, okay, now wait a second, what's going to go?
Especially there are different production teams out there too. You want something, the look to be unified and so many things to talk about early on.
Yeah, and so you just hit exactly, I think, why this is such, I'm so glad you asked this, because it's like the most important question on series edits. So there are 2 ways that you can do it, and it all comes down to scheduling and budget. You can still do it the way you would do a feature with just the director and one editor all the way through. And that is obviously contingent on a schedule that allows you the time to really sit and hammer out all of those episodes. The other way, as Libby was saying, is you can have one editor per episode, which is frequently what happens just with the budgets and schedules that you get. If you're doing that, you have to go into edit knowing what story you are telling in each episode, because you don't have the luxury that we all have on features where you just like, and we all know the magic happens in the edit room when you sort of figure it out, but it is the trickle-down theory. Every change that happens to episode 1, whether that's setting up the look and style of the show or how you're unfolding the information, will impact every single episode that's coming after. And I think that's a mistake that's sometimes made, is going into edit at the same time on multiple episodes with multiple editors without having set up the series look or the series storytelling. And I know Murder in the Body was saying the other day they made a really long and lean budget, and they had one editor the entire time and a director and the producer, but they dropped off almost all of their staffing so that they could stay in the edit for all 5 episodes.
Wow, that's huge. Yes. And then we'll continue.
And then one of the questions I had is like in terms of when someone brings you like a project, like what kind of materials do you want to see? Because obviously, like when it comes to archival, like maybe you don't have the funds or like the resources to find all of that material, but like, I mean, what you said about having a feature that serves as an example, I think is really helpful. But in terms of like, hearing this, like knowing the story, knowing how the episodes like kind of fall into each other, but like how much legwork needs to exist before someone like comes to you, I guess.
Another very important question. Do you want to see a proof of concept? Do you want to see an idea on paper, a lookbook, a proposal? What do you like to see? And it's probably different for each project. Mira?
Oh,
go ahead.
Oh, well, when I go to talk about a project, it changes between what it is, but usually it's going to be something that's a limited series, and maybe it's a familiar topic. You want to go in with some kind of access or some kind of something attached to the project that makes it only yours. Why are you the ones to tell the story? What do you have, or what can you bring to the story that's different from anyone else that's going to pitch Libby, right? So, and that can mean different things. Maybe it's like you've got access to like an incredible amount of archival that's never been seen before. Or maybe you've got like, someone who's willing to be interviewed in serial killer case who's never come out before, but something to be able to talk about in terms of presenting a story differently. On other projects, if it's a concept, we still always try and get some sort of axis or element that makes it unique and to us, but we also just bring in concept reels, like sizzle reels. Like this is what we think the look is going to be. Maybe it's like 2 minutes long, or maybe it's 6 minutes long, but here's what our vision is. And we usually always bring a pretty deck, because people like to
Photos,
live
colors.
through.
Yeah.
Shiny things.
Shiny things. I think less deck, honestly. I mean, I think for me, when I walk into a room, it's definitely that. I mean, so much of it is, I think, especially in the sports world, I feel like we have to have heard most things when we walk in, it feels like we know, all right, we've heard this pitch, but we haven't done it, here's why. I think your point of view and, again, why you're doing it, certainly footage is a killer for me, right? It's like, by the way, we just went into his so-and-so's uncle's basement, and we're about to transfer all this footage. Like, what is that? Like, show me that, it's just the wow factor, and a lot of that is seeing something, honestly, and it does not have to be, I mean, it's just so hard. I think so many people spend so much money and time on these presentations, and oftentimes I'm like, yeah, we have that in production already, and that's there on Thursday, So for me, it's less, it's more of what heart you're putting into it, and less of the fancy deck, and we hired so-and-so, and here's how it looks. I think it's more like sit in a room and with passion, tell me why you love this, and why I know you're going to be able to put that on screen, and oftentimes, seeing some of that archival, or seeing even just a little bit. Again, it does not have to be something, a $20,000 sizzle reel, but I think just identifying some of the pieces that really move you. I'm like you, I just love a good story. So I think if you can show me why you think it's special, that's important. And there's just a lot of people who come in with like 7 ideas that are sort of half-baked, and you're just like, you just don't care about any, like, I just know you don't care about any of these, you know what I mean? And they're like, well, what about this? You haven't done this before. I'm like, why am I, like, what, So I think it's less of just like throwing stuff against the wall, and more of this thing matters to me, and here's why it should matter to you too. And that really goes a long way. I was going to say something so smart, and I don't remember what it is.
I just want to answer your question from a very sort of basic, practical, I've got $5,000 or not even that kind of answer. If you need archival in your sizzle or whatever have you, you can get screeners and rip, right? And that might cost you $200 in terms of the screener part. If you have a style of your film that you think that you want to approach it with, and there are other things that are like that, a Mashable can help. If you only have one really deep, meaningful scene, that sometimes is often enough. I recently went into a room, and I won't say which one, Becky was there, and my directors hadn't transferred any of their footage, and what we did was we brought a big duffel bag of DV tapes and said, here, this is what we've got, right? So I think that there's a couple just very small, and if you don't, I love my graphic artists because I actually do find that decks are great to get the conversation going, and then obviously you've got to win the room. But learning Keynote is, honestly, when I have a project that's like on skin and bones, it's the easiest thing to sort of put 7 pages together that just kind of get there so that you can get in the room. But the biggest thing I would say, aside from those, smaller assets when you're working with no money, is really coming out to things like this and then talking to people so that you know what producers, and then talking to as many producers as you can, because they know what buyers are looking for. They also have been following buyers from this company to that company to this company. And so part of getting in the room is not wasting people's time, but also knowing what sparks them. And, somebody may be at this particular studio and that particular studio, and those two studios may seem like they do different things, but that person is still the same person. And so understanding who you're actually going to have that conversation with will be the best sort of asset for you to then have the presentation materials that will, we now know that Libby doesn't really give a shit about your deck, right? So that's like 5 hours less out of my life, right? And something that I don't have to pay $2,000 for. but somebody else is, might. So it's those little kinds of pieces, I think, when you have no money, that are really the kind of best ways of like, how do you kind of spend that little, little pocket.
I think, sorry, I know it's your turn. I just want to say quickly that I have also been pitched so many times where it's like, not a generic deck, but it's just a deck that for anybody, and it'll say still on the deck, like, here's why you, Netflix, should like this. And I was like, dude, like, whatever, that's gonna happen. But it's also kind of like, oh, you're just, you don't really care if it's me or somebody else, And I do think recognizing whether it's the individual or just the brand, like, I've seen some 30 for 30s, and I kind of know what you guys are going for, like. Again, sometimes it's just something that I'm like, we would never do this. Like, this just isn't what we do. And we spend a lot of time on pitches like that where I'm just like, oh, again, like, this just isn't really necessarily for us. And again, you don't have to tailor every pitch per person, but I do think knowing when you go into the room why this should be a fit for where you're going, and it's worth your time and it's worth their time, like, is really important too.
Yeah, research, do your homework, And Becky, last word. Unfortunately, our time is up, and but maybe we can move the conversation into the lobby a little bit, and if we have a little bit of time. Becky.
No, I will make this very short because these three brilliant women said almost everything. But the last thing is just like, don't get hung up on the money or licensing. Like for America Divided, I was taking out a trailer that we were bringing into major partners with a scene of Jesse Williams that we stole from Grey's Anatomy. And hopefully no one comes and sues us about like this was a beautifully edited trailer that had not one piece of footage that we had shot ourselves.
Oh yeah.
And that's like common in a music video of like literally YouTube from Grey's Anatomy of Jesse Williams. So don't get hung up on that. No one cares if you licensed it.
Right.
No one cares if you have like a Taylor Swift song in it.
For a pitch, yeah.
They're reels, they're not for broadcast.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, I've had that argument with so many filmmakers trying to develop something, and their lawyers give them that advice that they have to.
No.
It scares the bejesus out of them. So anyway, thank you.